Welcome to Secret War Channel. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the Vietnam War 1965–1973 was a persistent war, causing great damage to material and people. Not only for Vietnam, but also for America. During this time, series of war crimes recorded by international news outlets were collected. These include the massacres perpetrated by the U.S. military and its vassal states, murder, rape, prisoner torture, civilian bombing, to the intense use of Agent Orange. But the most brutal war crimes are committed by the Korean Army, the second largest foreign force in Vietnam. Since 1950, the President of the Republic of Korea at that time, Lee Tuo-van, raised the issue of the state of Vietnam to send troops to support the Vietnam War against the Viet Minh. However, the agreement between Korea and the national government of Vietnam was rejected by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the military support plan was stopped. After the French withdrawal, the U.S. replaced the French in Vietnam and changed its viewpoint, allowing Allied armies to join the war because then if many flags are gathered, the United States will gain greater international support when fighting on behalf of the coalition to bring freedom to the Indo-Chinese countries. From September 1964 to March 1973, the Korean government, under Park Chung-hee's administration, sent more than 300,000 troops to South Vietnam. The Korean Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Air Force all join as allies of the United States. The military commander is Lieutenant Gen. Choi Myung-shin of the Korean Army. From 1965 onwards, Korean combat units took turns to dock in Da Nang and officially joined the battle. That was the Capital Infantry Division with a very name called Mon Ho stationed in Quy Nhon, followed by the Infantry Division Bok Ma stationed in Phu Yen, Marine Brigade Green Dragon stationed in Quang Ngai, Hoi An. Mercenary Park Chung-hee is well trained and carefully selected. They are very adept at anti-guerrilla tactics, skillful tactics, trained according to the U.S. commando training textbooks, very stubborn and heavily poisoned about the hatred of the communist regime. In addition, even America must respect our martial arts skills. The criteria for soldiers participating in the Park Chung-hee mercenary units mentioned above are to have a high degree of qualification in the subject of Taekwondo or traditional Korean Hapkido. They can fight independently and find ways to maintain life in the deep forest when being lost in combat for a relatively long time. They study the rules of fighting and guerrilla activity very carefully and deal quite effectively in the first time. They organized large and wide sweeps. The night of the division of troops went to ambush suspicious positions with high perseverance and discipline. When traveling, they always took the lead. American helicopters and artillery support overhead and American soldiers supported the perimeter. They operate almost independently of the way and do not trust the way in terms of combat. They are ready to open fire without warning when a civilian goes astray into the area they occupy. Massacres of Korean soldiers in Vietnam. According to Korean professor Hyun-ik Kwon, author of many famous books about the Vietnam War, there have been over 43 bloody massacres committed by Korean soldiers in Vietnam, of which there are 13 murders per 100 people. Typically a few massacres such as Massacre Thai Binh. On an early morning of February 1966, a group of the Korean Army of the Tiger Infantry Division entered Thai Binh village, Quang Nam Province, in a raid on liberation guerrillas. However, they are only found in the village of 68 people, mostly women, the elderly and children. These innocent and defenseless humans have become subjects for the mighty tiger to vent their anger. With a series of gunshots and a grenade, Korean soldiers savagely killed 65 people. The 3 fortunate people who survived the massacre later became witnesses to denounce the crimes of the Tiger Army. To commemorate this mourning event, a memorial engraved with the names of 65 victims was erected in Thai Binh village. Thi Dien Nien Massacre, Phu Binh. On the morning of October 9, 1966, a platoon of Korean soldiers belonging to 3rd Battalion, Green Dragon Brigade began an attack from Quang Ton Hill Base, Tin Tho Commune, Son Tin District, Quang Ngai Province, into the village, Phu Binh. After that, they poured troops to sweep, search all people's houses and anti-artillery silos, forcing people in Binh Trung village, Phu Binh village, to gather on the schoolyard of the village. After gathering people, they began to fire guns and throw grenades at the civilians. This killing caused 68 innocent villagers to fall, including 21 elderly people, 47 women and children. On October 13, the Green Dragon Army continued to sweep and harm 112 more innocent people in the nearby Dien Nhiên village. In total, on October 9 and October 13, 1966, Korean soldiers slaughtered 280 women and children in 2 villages of Dien Nhiên, Phua Binh. Today, the Dien Nhiên, Phua Binh massacre relic has been ranked and granted a national monument. Hamai Massacre. In the early morning of January 26, Mao the year, February 25, 1968. In order to force the local people to stick to the strategic hamlet, 2 companies of the Green Dragon Brigade came to besiege Hamai village, Dien Commune Duong, Dien Ban District, Quang Nam Province. They gathered the elderly, women and children to the west hamlet at 3 points, in front of Mr. Wind Yu's house. 42 people, the basement of Mrs. Lati Choi, 16 people, and the house of Mr. Wind Bin, 74 people. After that, they used submachine guns, mortars, grenades, shot and threw them at the people. More barbaric, after massacre, they burned, meat burned, only bones piled up, no one had faces to identify. The massacre left 135 people murdered, mostly the elderly, women and children. The Banyan Tree Massacre. On the morning of January 4, Mao the year, February 12, 1968, residents of Phan Nhiet and Phan He villages in Dien Ban District, Quang Nam Province were awakened by the sound of shells and machine guns. After that, Korean soldiers appeared and escorted many women, the elderly, and children to the Banyan Tree along National Highway 1A. All of these people were then brutally executed. According to U.S. reports, 70 to 80 unarmed people were killed. The unit responsible for this war crime is the Korean 2nd Marine Brigade. Conflict between the U.S. and South Korea has occurred over the investigation of the massacre. The Korean side quibbled that the perpetrators of the massacre were Viet Cong soldiers wearing Korean military uniforms. But that is not the end of the crime of Korean soldiers in Vietnam. The most gruesome carnage occurred at the end of the raid. From February 15 to February 26, they killed nearly 600 people, mainly focusing on February 23 and February 26. February 26 went into the history of Binh An as well as the history of Binh Dinh province as a bloody and tearful day with the catastrophic event taking place in Go Dai, and Vinh village. Before the end of the 3-week massacre campaign, the South Korean soldiers had gathered all the people they captured from all the places. Like beasts, they killed 380 people with the most barbaric acts. They frantically raped women and brutally killed them by stabbing their doors with bayonets, straw burning the children alive. The massacre caused terror. After days of fear, many survivors had to leave their villages. From a rich village, Binh An covers an atmosphere of death and desolation. The remainder of the Go Dai massacre is a 33 meters long and 1.5 meters wide mass grave where 380 victims are buried. The enemy's massacre campaign had left tragic consequences for Binh An. Altogether more than 1,000 healthy civilians were killed, most of them the elderly, women and children. 1,535 out of 1,592 houses were destroyed. 649 buffaloes and cows died. Life in Binh An was so destroyed that villagers could no longer live and had to travel everywhere. Until 2 years later only someone has returned. For several decades after the war, due to the policies of the authorities, Korean people had little information about past activities of Korean soldiers in Vietnam. It was not until the early 2000s that the evidence of the crime began to be presented by the Korean media through revelations of Korean veterans in Vietnam. These revelations detailed the brutality on an unimaginable level of Korean soldiers against Vietnamese civilians, causing a shock in public opinion about the Koreans' role in the war, Vietnam. Aware of the past crimes committed by South Korean soldiers, since then, several Korean veterans and peace lovers have joined the campaign about the massacres in Vietnam, apologize to the people of Vietnam and raise money to build schools and hospitals in the worst affected areas. Through these activities, they desire to receive forgiveness from the Vietnamese people.